Hello everyone. Oh, sorry, getting all tangled up. I was working on something. How are you? Hello, welcome to our last live stream commentary of the year. I'm still shocked. I have to admit that the end of December creeped up on me. I just didn't expect it. It was too fast. Yeah, all those things. But I'm excited to be here with you. I'm excited to dive in and complete this paper. I feel blurry right now. All right, my video camera is having a moment too. It's not really trying to understand. Hello, there we are. It's a very weird time today. It's starting to get dark here. It's also been a gray and dark day. I don't know how it is. I had to make myself another warm cup of tea. Well, actually, this is a tisane because I felt like I wasn't going to make it. I had to like pump up all the heaters. It's been a cool. It's been a day. Anyway, okay. My video camera's starting to get back into place. So today we're going to finish up our paper. I hope we're going to finish up our paper that we were going through from Trewavas, which is about the foundations of plant intelligence. And I feel like it's, if you were here last week or if you caught the replay, this is one of those papers that on its face looks, what's the right word? It looks like it's going to be interesting. It looks like it's going to be informative. You get excited for it. And then when you get into it, it's still a little bit more of the same. It's more of the same. And you know how if you have any kind of business that you've had to do your own marketing for, you know that one of the biggest things is understanding your audience. I'm sure that that Trewavas thinks that he's hitting the mark with his audience. But I feel like, as I said last week, and you can go back and like watch my entire commentary, this paper is fascinating on its face if you don't know any of these arguments. This is a paper that came out in 2017, which means it's not that old, and it sort of summarizes where we are in the research up until now. But once we started to get into it, we realized that he was rehashing some old arguments that a lot of the neurobiological community has already explained away, in my opinion. And it doesn't really capture the real need right now. The real need is to understand intent. And I think that from the biological perspective, I was listening to a podcast this morning that was a really fascinating discussion between biomimicry and traditional ecological knowledge. And so here were two giants of these two fields talking about the differences and the similarities between these two fields. Now, biomimicry, for those of you that don't know, is bio-inspired design. The difference between kind of biomimetics or traditional bio-inspired design is that biomimicry as a field itself has an entire ethos that is really about the connection with nature, where biomimetic design just sort of takes from nature without necessarily caring about whether or not we're doing it in a nature-inspired way, whether we're really kind of going to the true principles or life's principles about how nature creates and maintains life. You could use really bad materials, plastics, and other kinds of stuff in biomimetic work, where biomimicry really pushes this idea of the ethos and of the connection to nature. And then you have traditional ecological knowledge that is looking more at, you know, in situ, in location, very location-specific knowledge, ancestrally passed from generation to generation, and also very observational in the sense that traditional ecological knowledge doesn't necessarily believe in dissecting an animal or a plant or anything in order to understand how that plant works or how that plant builds and does the things. So you're really looking at it from an observational point. And I feel like in part, this paper is kind of that, because it's molecular biology to a certain extent, plant molecular sciences. Trewavas is dissecting into the biology of a lot of these aspects of the intelligence of plants. And where that can be useful in some cases, the problem is that if we're trying to have an argument about intelligence, then once you break things down into biology, even we humans don't seem intelligent. It seems like all of the parts within us are just biological responses and predictive responses, right? It's kind of like the paper we went through relating to AI and why it's easier to think of artificial intelligence than other forms of intelligence, because mimicking what we are, since we already accept that we're intelligent. But once you start to break it down into its constituent parts, this cell reacts in this way when it's given this kind of protein or this kind of acid or this kind of this or this kind of that, the magic of what is life, and therefore that word intelligence, sort of fizzles out. And this is, I think, the biggest problem that we're having in the world of plant intelligence, where when we're approaching it from a biological response, we are missing intention and intentionality, and also the idea that there could be, even though we talk about this in the perspective of, we do talk about it in the sense that plants don't always react the same from year to year because they adapt to the conditions that they've experienced. If they've experienced droughts, if they've experienced flooding, if they've experienced lack of sunlight, if they've experienced, so can respond to these things. Where if we were to think about this from human, we would add very different words. We wouldn't even think we are adapting to our situation, especially because oftentimes we adapt badly, but we would think we were traumatized. We're responding to a trauma. We're responding to our negative experiences. We would use very different vocabulary to talk about humans, and that vocabulary in and itself has a emotional intelligence response built into it, and therefore we sort of easily associate that I must have to make decisions, conscious and unconscious, in order to get there, and therefore I have intelligence. Where by breaking things down to its biological constituents, I think we miss the mark on these conversations. And the fact that the whole plant cognition, and it's the reason why I sort of change the name of this commentary periodically, because I still haven't found the right words. I started off calling it plant intelligence commentary, then I moved to plant consciousness commentary. I've been throwing in plant advocacy commentary. None of them really fit in what I'm looking for, because what we're trying to do here is really get into the plant mind as a complete being, as a being. We're trying to take all of these papers and articles and essays and understand how the mind ticks, but not necessarily biologically speaking only, because again, when I break down things to the biological level, I remove autonomy. So I think Trewavas started this paper with the best of intentions. And I do think that Trewavas thinks, because he's a molecular biologist, and really working in plant molecular science, he really thinks that this is going to be the approach that's going to push people over to understanding better what exactly is that he's trying to say about intelligence. But I don't think it hits the mark. At least it hasn't up until now. So let me share the paper, get to where we were here. So here is our paper, the paper we've been talking about. This is a paper in interface focus. It's called The Foundations of Plant Intelligence. Last week we did part 1, where we went all the way through the different chapters, like sections that he has here, down to, where were we? Section, hold on, there we are. Here's where we started. Now, it is possible that as we get into swarm intelligence, we might trigger some of those things that I was talking about, that is more of intent. And the fact that I think, this is completely my opinion, by the way, my opinion only, maybe an ignorant opinion at some point. Remember, I am not a biologist. I'm much more on the design and cognitive front. But I think that this starts to get to the idea of agency, and agency, I think, gets associated more with intelligence. I think if we're going to sway the biological people who are in neurobiology, who are in the biological sciences, who are in molecular biology, who really think that modifying at the gene level doesn't require intelligence, which is hysterical, because it's the same thing we can do to ourselves, but we seem to see ourselves and plants so differently in this world. I think if we start to get into things like swarm intelligence, self-organization, where it feels much more like there's an intent and instead of a biological pull, even though it is all biology in the end, maybe we'll get somewhere else. So let's see where we're going. Let's see where he's going here. So we're in section 11, self-organization. So lessons from swarm intelligence. In complex multicellular animals, the immune system evolved to become a major assessment system, using both learning and memory. However, it is strongly diffused compared with the centrality of the brain. Although trial and error immune learning is used together with memories of different length, it is rarely referred to as intelligence. Maybe we will get where I think we should be going. Maybe not, we'll see. Some do, however, refer to it as the consciousness of the body. Distinct analogies to swarm intelligence have been noted. Okay, sorry, I had to go back and read something and make it click in my head. Sometimes when I'm reading, there are mechanics that happens in the reading process and I don't process everything. So it takes me a second to go back and process it. The diffuse behavior and localized capability of the immune system always takes place in conversation with the whole animal organism. Plants learn and remember both in a similar diffuse and localized fashion. Swarm intelligence, a dynamic network of interrelations. Swarm intelligence deals with natural systems whose behavior is coordinated via self-organization, decentralized, and distributed control. All behavioral similarities to plants. The swarm system is composed of many individuals who are largely homogeneous and interact with each other to form complex dynamic networks and with the environment. Via potentially simple rules. By the way, I should do, hold on a second. I want to write myself a note about stigmergy. Stigmergy is one of my favorite principles in nature that I think I need to revisit in 2024. I'm going to add this to the list of masterclasses. By the way, if you're in blooming sprouts or flourishing sprouts, I am completely open right now to the topics for our plant-inspired masterclasses. I'm compiling the 2024 list. So if you have an idea of something you want to go deeper diving into, something that I brought up in Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, the course, or something that we've talked about in one of these lessons and we want to do a deep dive, please let me know. I am collecting topics. My sort of mentality is, I go as deep as I can go in the plant-inspired masterclasses because that is the place of continued education for Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom and the place where we can really get into some of these topics. And then I take a lighter version of them for the podcast. So, I kind of touch them in different realms, but really the meat of it is inside of the Plant Inspired Masterclass. So if you have ideas for topics, I'm all ears. And stigmergy is definitely one of the ones that we want to talk on. I'm not going to go into it now because I think we would derail this conversation, but I will take it up in a masterclass. Feedback processes dictate function and control change. Parallel action is possible because individuals composing the swarm can perform different functions, making the overall behavior more flexible. The system is largely fault tolerant. That is, some loss makes little difference to the overall behavior. The coordinate behavior requires no overall controller, and without any individual being aware of the overall behavior. As Maeterlinck commented with regard to white ant colonies, what is it that governs here? What is it that issues orders, foresees the future, elaborates plans, and preserves equilibrium? Those rules allow thousands of relatively simple animals to form a collective brain able to make decisions and behave like a single organism. The behavior of each individual is best described in probabilistic terms, thus allowing a degree of variation among the individuals rather than exact responses. The behavior is effectively scale-free. Small numbers of nest individuals exhibit similar behaviors to much larger numbers. Present swarm intelligence analysis is largely confined to relatively simple arrangements, but its origin derives from social insect colonies, which are complex networks too. No insect member has an oversight of the behavior of the whole, just as no individual molecule has oversight over the complex nature that constructs a cell, or any tissue that constructs a whole plant. Most colonies grow with time and store resources. See, okay, wait, I'm going to give you an example of, to me, where he misses an opportunity. And again, this is just my opinion because I talk to a much more lay public, but he's still trying to convince people with very different opinions when he writes these papers. So to a certain extent, you have to touch your counterparts, your neurobiological counterparts, in a similar way, still sticking to the science, because I understand that he can't really go anywhere without the science. But so he says here, where is it? No individual molecule has oversight of the complex network that constructs a cell or any tissue that constructs a whole plant. They don't have oversight of a complex network that constructs a cell, but that cell then is part of a larger system that eventually ends up being a human being or an animal or something. I think you have to tie back to the idea, because the next line, any tissue that constructs a whole plant. Yes, but it's not just a cell. That cell is a cell in a larger system, and that system is autonomous, even though that it might seem like that one cell is not. I don't know if I can explain myself. I'm going to keep going, but hopefully you're starting to get the idea that I really feel like there needs to be a bridge made between the idea of this dissecting everything down to its, and looking at it from a systems approach, and looking at it that we, even as humans, are the same. Our cells are reacting in ways that we don't control individually, but we are still intelligent. Therefore, plants have cells that are reacting individually, and they are still intelligent too. Most colonies grow with time and store resources against seasonal variation, but growth is slow and not readily visible without measurement. It is the whole nest that is subject to selection and fitness, a product of diverse interactions, feedbacks, and communications between the individuals. Analogous organization and behavior between social insect colonies and angiosperm plants. The growing plant is self-organizing. There is no overall controller of the phenotype, and development occurs from the bottom up than the top down. There are numerous leaves, equivalent to insect workers, and branch roots that do have qualitatively different but parallel functions in acquiring essential nutrients. Furthermore, leaves do communicate with other leaves. Roots communicate with other roots. Self-evidently, there is communication between root and shoot. Fault tolerance is shown by root pruning experiments in which substantial amounts can be removed without loss of shoot growth and shoot pruning, which subsequently increases yield. Feedback and feed-forward processes control the growing plant and phenotypic plasticity. Plant individuals can be considered scale-free. Loss of some leaves or roots is tolerated, but the individual remains. Leaves and roots are fixed on the same organism. Whereas in social insect colonies, the individuals move separately around, but interacting with each other. Branch and leaf behavior is best considered in probabilistic terms, accounting for a degree of variation in numbers and position observed. Both plants and swarms later produce male and female for reproduction. Other analogous behavior has been published, which indicates quorum sensing as a basis for the whole plant decision. The individual plant itself, key self, whatever, is subject to selection and fitness. The beehive collects nectar, carbohydrates, pollen for N, for nitrogen, and water when required. These are exactly the same constituents needed by plants. It is thought that low levels of protein in workers is the stimulus that instructs more workers to concentrate on collecting pollen needed for growing grubs. The plant equivalent, instigated by low protein levels in cells, is to increase root production and search for new sources of nitrogen. Nectar is used for honey, an energy resource to cover the winter. The number of honeycombs, empty cells for storing honey, are thought to be stimulus diverting more workers to collect nectar. Low levels of circulating carbohydrate are probably the stimulus for more leaf production, the equivalent of workers again. Water is only collected to cool the hive by evaporation. Part of the function of roots is to collect water, and deficits institute increased search activity. Evaporation of water in the internal spaces of the leaf enables cooling. Hives also maintain a relatively constant temperature. Recent research has demonstrated that leaves themselves on trees ranging from arboreal to subtropical maintain a relatively common internal temperature of 21.4 plus or minus 2.2 degrees Celsius. This is an approximate optimum for photosynthesis. The external temperature of the boreal to the subtropical averages range from 12 degrees to 26 degrees Celsius. There are 6 ways known that help to maintain this apparent homeostasis to either cool or warm the leaf. The internal leaf temperature is regulated by manipulation by leaf blade orientation, control of stomatal aperture, chloroplast movement inside cells, changes in leaf hairiness and wax reflective, blah, 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 blah. Yes, yes, yes. Basically, they maintain their own internal temperature. We as humans maintain an internal temperature. Is this conscious? No. Is it intelligent? Yes. It's intelligent because my body is an intelligent organism and is an intelligent system. And my system has been regulated to know that the optimum level, the optimal temperature for my body to have. If the temperature external to me goes up and I have no way of, cooling myself down externally, then my internal system kicks in and certain things happen in order for me to cool down, right? I sweat and other aspects. These comparisons, I get what he's trying to do, but he goes so into the biology, which might be necessary, right? But he goes so into the biology that I wonder if he misses, right? The fact that he doesn't make the idea that all these systems are intelligent systems, and therefore we should extend this intelligence. I think he's trying to say it clearly, and probably in some circles, it comes across very easily to understand, oh, he's describing this in such detail because this is equivalent to the cooling system that exists in animals or of other sorts, and we consider those to be intelligent systems, therefore these are systems. But I think he needs to be a little bit more explicit that these are systems that we consider to be intelligent systems, even if they're unconscious systems, and therefore these are intelligent systems in plants, even if it turns out that they are or are not unconscious. In other words, how consciously the plants are choosing to do these things is irrelevant for the idea of intelligence. And I think that this is the important part. We need to be much more explicit in saying, where is it that we, even as animals, have unconscious processes, but they're still considered to be intelligent? Therefore, these processes over here, it's okay if the plants are doing them unconsciously, they're still considered intelligent. Or over here, we have conscious processes, and let's admit that we don't know enough about the plant mind in order to assess whether or not the plant is being conscious or non-conscious in this area. 11.3, assessment and coherence in plants. What has always been problematic in plant intelligence is assessment. In animals, it becomes easy to identify the brain as an assessment organ that controls movement. The social insect colony, in contrast, acts holistically while allowing distributed control. The search and collect behavior of groups is analogous to phenotypic plasticity. The whole colony survives on complex messaging and negative and positive feedback between individuals. On this, okay, now he's getting to the place where I'm trying to say this. Okay, thank you, Trewavas. On this analogy, the assessment of individual signals and this necessary decisions to be taken by plants arise simply from the complex communication between cells, tissues, and organs involving numerous feedback and feed-forward processes. Assessment in plants does not require the equivalent of a brain, although a functional equivalent may be present. But if swarm intelligence is the term to describe this behavior in social insects, then the analogous behavior in plants certainly deserves the description of intelligence too. The intelligent behavior of swarms in plants is indicated by a quote. Indeed, it is not too much to say that a bee colony, individual plant, is capable of cognition in much the same sense that a human being is. The colony, or plant, gathers and continuously updates diverse information about its surroundings, combines this with information about its internal state, which is the assessment part, and makes decisions that reconcile its well-being with the environment. That statement provides a challenge for future plant research. Okay, now we're starting to get a little bit more into what I was trying to say, that I think he needs to make these very clear analogies and correlations. Otherwise, people are not going to get it because they cannot substitute one thing for another clearly enough. So that was a great way of finishing that section. Section 12, the plant dance floor. One of the intelligent characteristics of the beehive is the way workers are redirected toward different food services as they are discovered. The information exchange takes place on the dance floor, the famous waggle dance, a meeting place where several different dances are used to manage and control information flow. Commonly, there is internal competition among different shoot branches for root resources that are gained from the vascular system. Likewise, there is internal competition among different roots for shoot resources. Uncontrolled competition, however, cannot work. In the shoot, those branches nearest the root would gain most root resources and prevent much further shoot branch growth. Similarly for the root system. The cambium is the meristem producing new vascular tissue by cell division. Topologically, it is like an inner skin continuously connected throughout the plant stem and root system and in direct contact with the vascular system. The cambium, right under the bark or the outer layer of the stem, is responsible for much girth increase, but it has a second function. It also generates the vascular tissue that connects newly growing buds and branches to the main vascular strands that connect shoot and root together. As part of a continuous monitoring and arbitration program, the cambium comparatively assesses the productivity of each branch. In simple terms, those branches that are very productive are provisioned with more vascular tissue and more root resources. Those that are moderate remain unchanged, and those doing poorly have some vascular tissue blocked. If totally unproductive, all connection is blocked and the branch dies. Branch dies, not the entire plant. Branch formation well illustrates intelligent adaptive variability. This is also the case for leaves, which are due to be abscessed. The vascular tissue connection is blocked as an abscission zone secreting wall hydrolysis is constructed, enabling a clean break. A similar situation is probably found below ground. Cambial cells must be, I'm waiting for the point where he makes the connection between this and intelligent behavior. Cambial cells must be in continuous communication with each other in order that comparative assessments can be made. It is a tissue that acts holistically in girth increases gravitropic responses. Cambial regenerate, gravitropic just means it's pulled by gravity, in other words, in the direction of gravity. Cambial regeneration and wind sway responses indicating communication occurs throughout itself and thus capable of this critical role. What information is used as comparative assessment is not known, but clearly carbohydrate flux rates through the phloem adjacent to the cambium are one possibility. Hormones are another. The manipulation of the vascular system here also accounts for the controlled manipulation of all sorts of activity which come under the title of source and sink. Where are we? Areas of carbohydrate availability like leaves are regarded as sources and sink areas that use carbohydrate. It is assumed that carbohydrate flows variably through the vascular system like water through a pipe. This may not be the case. Movement will be controlled by the vascular system, and increased movement will probably require more vascular tissue. Okay, but I think he's trying to describe that this is the equivalent of the waggle dance between in bees, but man, he misses it. He misses the opportunity. He did it so nicely. The only section really is the section right before this where he ties it up and says, this behavior over here that I described, here's how I described it in detailed biology of how it is that the plants do this, and here's why this is the equivalent system as this. In systems thinking, this is how it works. He didn't do it here. And it's like, what a shame, because just because. Correcting errors in behavior, how plants count to 5. The ability to correct errors in behavior that is unproductive and launch it on a correct course suggests an ability to compare what is actually happening with what should be happening. The current unproductive situation is directly compared to a potential and productive future. Error correction reflects intelligent adaptive variability and equates to attention. It should improve fitness by minimizing energy waste on fruitless enterprise. Although there are few examples of error correction in plants, I suspect many more occur during development itself, and intrinsic mechanisms are likely to be present. Something like error correction should operate during herbivory, disease, or abiotic stresses, using feedback to correct. But again, how do you tie this back to intelligence? Okay, so this is 13. So this is still part of the section. Maybe he'll connect it back. Climbing plants. A number of plants climb on others and use various sensitive tissues, tendrils, leaf, petioles, stems for this purpose. When the sensitive tissue detects a support through a mechanical signal, they usually attempt to encompass or wind around it. The energy consumption of climbers is reduced compared with plants that provide their own independently supporting stem. Climbing plants use circumnutatory movement, nutatory movement to search for suitable supports. Some detect suitable support by mechanical stimulation for impact. Others use reflected far red light or detection of volatile chemicals. But provision of an unsuitable smooth support for climbers, such as glass rods, leads to some initial winding, followed by unwinding and continuation of the search for suitable support elsewhere. Okay, I'm not getting into all of the. Okay, here we go. There's a little, I'm not just getting into all the details of this because you can read the mechanics. From my own observation of a vine in my greenhouse, tendrils normally attempt to assume the shape of whatever surface they come into contact with. That is, they learn progressively the shape of the potential support characteristics. Coiling is common because most potential support structures are round or oval. Darwin also recorded this behavior too in climbing plants and observed that they often recoil from such situations. He offered a blackened zinc plate to a tendril-containing plant and noted that they bent themselves around the edges of the zinc plate, but they soon recoiled from these objects with what I can only call disgust and straightened themselves. While disgust is clear in Darwin's anthropomorphic assessment, there is a clear plant assessment made of the unsuitability of the support. I have observed similar recoil from an initial unsuitable support. Tendrils do require two signals, blue light and touch, to initiate curling. If touched in darkness and then the blue light signal given later, they exhibit curling for a period of up to 2 hours before the excitation state from the touch stimulus disappears. Okay, why are you telling me all this? Remember, I own the prize. The prize is intelligence. What are you trying to tell me? That it's intelligent that they know to recoil and that they've let it go? Then tell me that. Tell me that. Make it clear. Okay, 13.2. Insectivorous plants. Insectivorous plants often, all of this is under section 13, right? And section 13 is correcting error behavior and plants count to 5. Okay, so this is all about how plants correct behavior. Insectivorous plants often live on nitrogen poor soils and need to supplement their diet with insects that they capture and digest. Darwin authored a book on them, which actually sold better initially than his opus magnus. The Venus flytrap, Dionea, contain two sensitive hairs that must be touched within 20 seconds of each other for their trap to close. Each touch of the hair initiates an action potential that is conveyed to, you already know this. If you know me, you know this because I talk about this all the time. So hold on, I'm going to try to get to the place where he maybe gets interesting. Hello? This is how the plant works. They have in these beautiful action potentials. They secrete the digestive enzymes. They dissect their plants, okay? In allowing small insects to escape, the plant is assessing the potential energy gain as unrewarding against the potential future, much larger and energy-rich prey. Fair. But see, here, this is a great line that then needs to make a complete direct correlation to intelligence. Similarly, for Drosera, the sundew, Dionea and Drosera, the sundew, when insects land on the sticky tentacles, other tentacles bend to touch and enmesh the insect further with sticky solution. The whole leaf then folds in on itself, envelops its prey, and digests it over many weeks. The signal indicating the response may be protein. Okay, yes, but he just went through this whole section 13, and still didn't make a correlation back to intelligence. I just don't understand. I don't understand how he thinks that this is, I mean, I get listing a lot of these things, but these things have been listed already. None of this is new. This is all old research. Like, this is 2017, Trewavas. Who are you talking to? Okay, let's maybe in game theory, he's going to address something different. So in game theory, competition is the essence of Darwinian selection and thus individual behavioral interaction, the interaction that gives rise to hierarchy of fitness. Populations are dependent on a mixture of demes, and demes are composed of a mixture of individuals. Individual competition is how Darwin assumes selection to operate. Game theory was originally constructed to analyze competition in economics among companies rather than individuals in biology. Maynard Smith and Price first used game theory to describe animal conflict. Some plant competition studies have received attention and are described at greater length. When plants share soil in close proximity, they proliferate their root tissue, reducing shoot growth and potentially seed number. The known aim is to sequester soil resources before they are removed by adjacent competitors, and is another example of adaptive variability. How these plants recognize that they are growing next to aliens compared with self is not clear, but evidence indicates a recognition process at work. What a really complex way of saying they recognize their own kin. Like, how these plants recognize that they are growing next to aliens. I love it. I'm sorry. Seedlings constructed to contain 2 shoots and 2 roots can be split down the middle, and 2 daughters, each containing a shoot and a root, separately cultivated. After a number of months apart, each daughter now responds to the other genetically identical partner, assayed as root proliferation, as alien. Clearly, a form of self-recognition is present. Observations made from a number of excavated root systems in both the wild and agricultural settings indicate that roots of different species do avoid each other and leave space in between, suggesting the potential for alien recognition may be common. The recognition mechanisms are unknown, but suggest intention. Oh, finally, the intention word that I've been talking about. These are also indications that soil space itself is a signal with greater space, but not greater resources. Plant development and the phenotype is change. If space is a signal, a mechanism involving recognition of the amount of soil space available is currently unknown. A third partner modifies competitive circumstances and leads to some cooperative behavior among individuals. Some 80% or more of angiosperm plants exist in symbiotic combination with mycorrhizal fungi. Secretion of chemicals from roots like strigolactone attracts endomycorrhizal fungi whose hyphae penetrate the plant root and then the root cells to form an arbuscular membrane. Say that whole line 3 times fast. Carbohydrate is passed across the transit member to the symbiont, and phosphate and iron is passed back to the host from the symbiont. In conifers and some digot trees, ectomycorrhizae forms a sheath around the root rather than penetration. Symbiosis requires a complex conversation between host and symbiont. Otherwise, defense reactions are initiated. I really like the way that Susan Simard described all this. It was much easier to follow along. All right, hold on, because he's going through a lot of technical complex and I want to see where he's going to. Here we go. However, some symbionts can cheat on the relationship. In the case of mycorrhizal, the individual can accumulate phosphate for itself and not pass it on. In that situation, the plant has 2 known strategies. The host can insist on a 1-to-1 exchange of phosphate for carbohydrate. Alternatively, the host initiates defense reactions against the cheater. Now, if that's not intention, I don't know what is. I mean, you have 2 possible choices. You have to make an assessment and you have to make a choice. This is the kind of things I wanted to call out much more clearly. Like, this is intelligent behavior because there is a choice to be made. There is analysis that's being performed, and then a choice is being made based on that analysis. Similar problems occur when well-known legume rhizobial bacterial symbiosis. There are a very large number of rhizobial species, only some of which are symbiotic in respect to exchanging nitrogen for carbohydrates. Some of the non-providers can enter the root through cracks, usually caused by lateral root breakthrough. The non-providers employ recognition conversations acquired for the symbiotic species. They live in spaces between spells, but can be subject to defense reactions if they fail to provide the fixed end. Others enter, okay, hold on. It's another one of those things where I'm like, is he being technical for the sake of being technical? Here we go. Again, the plant becomes aware of the cheating situation and reduces the anaerobic status of the nodule that damages cheater fitness. Dealing with cheaters is obviously intelligent behavior. Finally, Trewavas used to say this much more often in this paper. You should, every time you give an example at the end, you should say, this is obvious intelligent behavior. However, a single mycorrhizal individual can connect together several individual plants of the same or different species to form a common mycorrhizal network. Evidence suggests that various kinds of information can be passed through this network. Partners subject to herbivore and disease attack do transfer some information to from donor to adjacent receiver in the network, enabling them to prepare suitable defense reactions via increased defense enzyme changes. Within 24 hours, the receiver plant had increased defense enzyme levels up to 3-fold. A potential form of communication is through action potentials and cytosolic, there we go, calcium waves, maybe, I don't know, you correct me, induced by herbivore damage in the attacked plant. Receipt of substantive electrical signals by the root may pass easily into the penetrating mycorrhizal. Fungal hyphae have been reported to exhibit action potentials. Such electrical information could continue through to receiver plants, initiating action potentials in them. Okay, but tell me why this is important. Competition between plants is thus moderated, and much earlier ecological studies on competition may need some reassessment. With two different plant species as partners in a common mycorrhizal network, a more intelligent partner can sequester more of the mycorrhizal material which has been observed. The mycorrhizal network can also transfer water, some allelochemicals, and some sugars to partners in the mycelial network. How far these elements of communication can inform and affect other network partners is not known, but limits must be strict unless there is information amplification by each partner. See, again, I feel like he has a gem of piece of information here, and he just needs to give a comparison to make it clear that these are the reasons why he's considering this to be intelligent behavior. See where we are, just because of a time check. We are at 14.2. Oh, we're almost at the end. Okay. Shoots and games. Shoot behavior analysis by game theory has indicated necessary trade-offs, decisions and choice between plant height and foliage density of forest herbs growing competitively under a canopy or in full sunlight. Height is gained at the expense of leaf number, and game theory explains how these herbs grow to different heights despite all being subject to similar reductions in light exposure. Choice and decisions enter into the games as indicated earlier, with obvious decisions about optimizing energy expenditure against energy gain using probabilistic assessments. Further analysis has investigated leaf competition on the same plant because older leaves get shaded by younger ones. In this model, the leaf area index was predicted to increase with an increasing degree of inhibition and light interception between genetically distinct neighbors. This implies that clonal plants with genetically identical daughters have different LAI structures. Okay, let's talk about VOX. Volatile organic chemicals, the plant language, question mark. What I like about the idea of talking about volatile organic chemicals is that when we talk about plant communication, if we focus on VOX, there is no doubt that we can say that there is a human-plant communication language happening. Wait, that came out wrong. Hold on. If we talk about volatile organic chemicals, because we as humans also sense them, then the idea of plant communication moves out of the realm of woo and into the realm of science. That's what I wanted to say. And I would love that to be studied in that way. because we talk about how herbivores and other kinds of animals register Vox, as well as how plants register Vox, but we study very little how humans react to Vox and how that could be some way that plants can pass messages to us that we receive through non-verbal channels. It's the way my mind works. The Vox are emitted by leaves, shoots, roots, bark, fruits, and flower of probably all plants. About 1% of fixed carbon is used and emitted. The spectrum of emitted volatiles is changed by herbivore attack and disease that can attract parasitoids of the herbivorous pests, so-called burglar alarm. Okay, I'm not getting into the actual technical piece. So volatile organic chemicals are the chemicals that plants produce, oftentimes, in this case, as he's talking about, in response to something to pass a message. There are, though, a whole series of volatile organic chemicals that plants produce that we don't actually really know exactly what they're for. And many of which, when they enter into a human system, have lots of different benefits for us as human beings when we breathe them in or we take them into our system. There's a wonderful book called The Biophilia Effect hold on, I can't read his name. Arway, is that his name? Anyways, it's a great book, and he goes into a lot of discussion around this topic. So there are a lot of different ways to look at this. Okay, these chemicals can diffuse to adjacent plants if they're sufficiently close together and initiate defense mechanisms in unattacked plants. The limit of useful spreads in about, yes. This is we've read this a bunch of times, right? Plants can detect when they're being attacked. They can pass this message on to other plants through these volatile organic chemicals. And this is an intelligent response to being able to alert others. So I'm not going to read all of this because we already know it. If you're interested in how the mechanics of all this works, then okay, hold on. The Vox spectrum is qualitatively different between individual species and even individuals. Obvious fitness benefits arise from when those emitted by flowers and fruits, variations in fragrance can mark out intelligent behavior. Because of course, what we think of as smells is part of the Vox. Holopainen and Bland have creatively suggested that the complexity and species individuality of Vox act as a plant vocabulary or language. Individual volatiles are words, and the Vox signatures represent sentences. A sentence is an emergent property of the words used to construct it. Now you have my attention. If the analogy is useful, it suggests that the whole Vox signature, due to synergy between the words, is essential. Omission of one or two words, that is, one or two Vox, will fail. Something now reported in one case. The Vox emitted by damaged shoots elicits greater response in genetically identical relatives than aliens, even from the same species, suggesting the potential for self-recognition and perhaps altruism. Now you're starting to get to true foundations of plant intelligence. The concept of spontaneity suggests each individual will likely emit its own signature. Plants can sense alien volatiles is known. The young seedlings of dodder, a parasitic plant, home in on their prey by sensing the direction of emitted volatiles and potentially use emitted volatiles to assess the suitability of prey for exploitation. Numerous Vox are emitted by rhizosphere bacteria and mycorrhizae and alter root architecture in different ways. To enable these changes in form, there have to be root sensing mechanisms via receptor proteins and concurrent signal transduction sequence. If alien species of plant root emit these volatiles, they will induce root proliferation too. In other words, they've got this vocabulary. People need to be able to understand it. Some stuff is in a dialect that is specifically for your kin. Some stuff is done in a universal language like the universal English. And it shows that there's a lot of interesting chitter chatter going on, and therefore these intelligent beings are connecting and communicating, a very important aspect of intelligence. But again, he didn't wrap it up. Wrap it up, man. Leaf mimicry through volatile organic chemical recognition. It's a question. Boquilia trifoliata, my God. Boquilia trifoliolata, a climbing vine in temperate rainforest, mimics the leaves of its supporting host in terms of size, shape, color, orientation, petiole length, and or tip spininess. The consequence of mimicry is to reduce herbivory. Mimicry on 8 different hosts has been reported. A vine extending across different hosts responds to each specifically in turn. The sensing mechanism is clearly unique to each host species, and the most likely individualistic signal is released host bark vox. Again, the sensing requires receptors able to discriminate the particular group of vox. However, Mancuso and Belusca have creatively suggested that plants do possess primitive eyes, that is, ocelli, based on very early suggestions by Haberlandt. These might provide the necessary discrimination. I think did we go through that paper here? Or I thought I went through that paper. I might have gone through that paper. If I didn't, let me know, but it's an interesting paper which has been, in my very unscientific study of different groups that I've taken in to do experiences in the woods, I would definitely say plants possess primitive eyes. Primitive is not even the right word, I would say, because I don't think that they are primitive. I actually think that they're way more advanced. They just have a different range. They just see things very differently than we do. These might provide necessary discrimination. Anything that does discriminate between the fine details in its environment using light justifiably has a tissue akin to an eye, although obviously much, I wouldn't say simpler, obviously much different, very different. A combination of smell and sight is more likely to lead to accurate recognition. Some vines simply avoid trees on which the trunk is too smooth to enable climbing. Again, recognition of a particular group of vox seems to, at present, the most likely explanation. This is huge, right? The idea that a plant can see, and we also see others. I mean, even poison ivy, I think, also has a certain amount of mimicry. There's some other plants that will mimic their leaf shape based on who's around them. And this is definitely a point of intelligence, because this is a choice as to do this. They don't always, these particular plants do not always mimic the leaves. They do so based on what they believe, and I use that word, what they believe to be the most effective way to handle the current situation, to either keep safe or to develop fitness or to connect with somebody else. So this is a huge piece of intelligence that I should be clearly labeled and such. 15.2, volatile organic chemical receptors. The range of volatile chemicals produced below ground is quite extraordinary and sufficient to account for the complexity of self and alien recognition, which is known to occur. And I think that this part, by the way, volatile chemicals secreted underground, is definitely something that hasn't hit the mainstream as much as the idea of volatile organic chemicals being released from what's the word I'm looking for? Through the air transmission. I think it would be really interesting for us to expand more on the fact that there is lots of, I know we talk about underground communication, but I think that there's not a lot of understanding of what the mechanisms. Volatile organic chemicals is definitely one of them. Electrical receptors are another one. There's a few different types, you know, the mycorrhizal, what's passing through that we talked about earlier. And I think bringing these together in a more clear way to show, because the fact that there are multiples, I think really does speak to, again, intelligence, because intelligence says, I don't just have one mechanism and that's what I always use. Intelligence means I have to choose from a whole series of different mechanisms. And I think that that's extremely powerful to share, to state that, well, a plant has many different ways that they can communicate. And so therefore they have to make choices of what are the most effective forms of communication based on the environment and the other species that they want to communicate, and switch between that. And that is most definitely a foundation of intelligence and showing that there is intelligence. So how are vox sensed? Since plants synthesize many vox, they do have enzymes with active sites that produce the chemical in the first place, and thus have a potential with slight modification of producing a similar protein for sensing them. To simplify the detection of the vox signature, a single protein receptor detecting only partial signatures of all individual vox signature complex is indicated and is characterized in autotope theory. These are forms of sensory capability akin to smell in animals. So 16, learning and priming from experience. Learning about a stimulus requires a transduction sequence process, whereas the signal is processed either by cells or neural systems. For intelligent behavior, the learning process should institute a memory which can be accessed to modify subsequent behavior. Intelligence is commonly held to consist essentially of the modification, improvement of behavior in accordance with experience. I like this. Intelligence is commonly held to consist essentially of the modification, improvement of behavior in accordance with experience. It is the correlations of experiences and actions that constitutes intelligence. Even in bacterial swimming, a few second memory is required of the previous experience so that a new direction of swimming can be assessed and used. But memories have to be learned first. Learned memories in animals usually results in obvious changes in behavior, detection by altered movements, but with the obvious exception of the immune system. There are many similar learning and memory events in plants that are simply discounted because the plant fails to visibly respond to a reflection of the different plant lifestyle. But they can be experimentally detected. As with the immune system, the memory length can be diverse. In plants, they vary from a few seconds to hours, weeks, months, or even years, dependent on the tissue and particular signal. This variability is inevitable in the nature of sense organizing structures of plant phenotype. Okay, this is a kind of technical way, but I think he wrapped this part. This is a section that I think he wrapped up nicely, where he talks about, he really brings it, even in a very technical way or biological way, but he does bring in and he makes that intelligence clear. And I really appreciate, I wish there was more of that throughout this entire paper. Because I think that if we're going to go for the neurobiological, the human neurobiology people and really help them understand this form of intelligence, then it's important. I also would like to know, and maybe he himself didn't know when he wrote this, but I'm curious as to how this paper could be a foundation upon which the whole consciousness discussion bases itself off of. I don't know if he was thinking that far when he wrote it or if he was, or if it wasn't, but I think it would be slightly organized differently or at least summarized differently if he was thinking about what the next steps of what would happen after this paper. Herbivory disease and abiotic stress induce memories lasting months to years. Those plants that experience herbivory or disease become primed to further insults so that they now respond more quickly. See, here is, we're talking about trauma. In humans, we would use the word trauma, and therefore we would induce a sort of understanding of emotionality. And from that emotionality, intelligence, and a whole series of things would be just a given. If we were to, this is trauma. I mean, this is the exact same thing. Plants have a trauma, they deal with that trauma. Do they deal with the trauma the same way we humans do with the trauma? Probably not, which is good, but it's still trauma. Those plants that experience herbivory or disease become primed to further insults so that they now respond more quickly, to a greater extent, and thus more robustly than unchallenged plants. This is clearly, by definition, intelligent behavior. Agreed. Priming can last for years and in certain cases survives meiosis. Chromatin structural modifications through epigenetic changes are one probable mechanism. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a similar chromatin modification or remodeling is involved in long-term memory in neural circuits. The most recent addition to the potential for plant memory is that of prions recently discovered in plants, and which provide a novel method of memory over long periods of time. Priming is quite simply learning, and the memory is long-lived, modifying future behavior. Priming could well be dependent on such protein memory. See, again, now we're getting into clarity. This is clear even to me, even for me as a non-scientist, but I think even from a scientific perspective, it's super clear. Priming is now recognized to occur after repetitive heat, drought, cold, and salt stresses, which train the plant to respond more quickly and more robustly to repetition of these conditions. The experience is learned and remembered. The memory then participates in modifying subsequent behavioral to these abiotic insults. Why does he call them insults? I guess he doesn't want to call them traumatic events. Insults. And in ways that will impact and hopefully improve fitness. Repetitive treatments with hormone abscisic acid primes ABA-dependent genes in the same way. Their expression now responds more quickly and to a greater extent to subsequent hormone treatments. Perhaps more intriguing is the obvious crosstalk between many of these abiotic stressful conditions in which some of the same events are induced by separate stresses. Thus, the response to one, like heat, increases resistance to cold stress. Similarly, herbivore attack increases resistance to disease. These observations represent kinds of conditioned behavior in which one signal influences responses to another and increases fitness. The life history of individually cloned plants from the same parent determines their capability for stress response and priming. It illustrates how sensitive plants are to slight environmental variation and indicates the potential for fitness, variation, and intelligent behavior. Stress-induced signal transduction pathways commonly involve information flow through cystolytic dependent processes and numerous interlinked protein kinase pathways. Concomitantly, I didn't even realize that was a word in English. It's a word in Italian, but the synthesis of a protein constituents of these pathways are increased, deepening the metabolic channel and increasing the direction through which the information flows. During learning by the brain, synaptic connections are strengthened and or new connections made, thereby deepening the channel of information flow through particular neural pathways. The analogous aspects of learning in both organisms is complete. The conclusion. Learning, memory, and intelligence are not common terms in plant science because of a belief that these behaviors are properties only of organisms with neural systems, and the fear that once we recognize learning, memory, and intelligence in plants, what the hell will we eat or destroy? I'm telling you, we got to get at some point to the core, and the core is that fear. Plant scientists, being of course animals themselves, has expectations that intelligence involves obvious visible movement. True. The animal immune system, single cells, the entire social insect colony, and the extensive experience provided here on plants indicates the necessity for better replication of the intelligence that underpins them. Plant intelligence does not require an obvious brain. Complex communication, still poorly understood in plants, may be sufficient. It is the area of signal assessment that future investigation needs to concentrate. The tenor of much plant research has concentrated on identifying signals, the positive feedbacks that initiate change. Perhaps the more crucial are the negative feedback interactions, of which virtually nothing is known, that indicate receipt of a signal and control its further expression. Nervous systems were an almost inevitable consequence of the need to move to find food. Particular lifestyle, but just one of several that we of course share. Intelligence, however, is an inevitable consequence for all organisms that consistently deal with a variable environment, both plant and animal. Without it, competition and fitness would never have energized, evolutionarily changed in the way that they have. From an initial and controversial beginning in 2003, plant intelligence investigations are now spreading into different areas of study that find the concepts productive and even beginning the complex consideration of the meaning of plant cognition. The frontier continues to expand. Okay, I like his ending. I like his ending a lot. I agree. I feel like he had these moments where I think he got lost in his own technicalness, but I think he brought it back out. So overall, I have positive feelings about this paper. I feel like he still doesn't know his audience well enough and he has to choose who his audience is better, but he's on the right track. So, all right, I'll give you a little space. All right, Trewavas. I actually like Trewavas. I like that he is a molecular biologist. I like in general the way that he thinks about these matters. I think that the combination of someone like Anthony Trewavas and people like Michael Marder and Michael Hall and such really expand. Galeano comes over from a very personalized approach and through her own scientific research. I think where we have now this vast array from Robin Wall-Kimmerer to Susan Simard to Trewavas to others, some going observationally, some going molecularly. And I think that all of these are important to make the arguments. I would hope that given that this is a 2017 paper and that today we are in 2023, that the discussion about intelligence at least has been laid to rest. I feel like intelligence has been proven time and time and time again. I think that he is right on saying that the next frontier that we're heading into is cognition. And I think that cognition tips into that consciousness, and that's probably part of where a lot of the fear comes from once we tip into that consciousness piece. But I think that cognition in and of itself is going to be a little bit more like the intelligence conversation, where we're going to be able to approach it. And I think there, I haven't seen this enough, but I do hope that we're going to go there. I think that we have the ability to go towards traditional ecological knowledge, like going into a more indigenous approach, because cognition and psychology of plants is really more about observation of behavior and understanding behavior. And therefore, traditional ecological knowledge, I think, will give us some insights into how we can better study this. This is just my opinion. I am not by any chance, by any means, an absolute expert, but I do think that this could be a really interesting direction to take for these types of things. But I'd love to hear what you think. You know, as you listen along, where are the parts that you felt were interesting? Where did he get lost in the weeds? What are the arguments that you feel like are really important to us to go forward? I think as I was looking through my list of papers going forward, I do have a few, and I wanted to go down this because I do have a few that are a little bit technical that I've been debating on whether or not to do. Things that talk about, for example, the effects of sound waves on plants, which goes to the whole question of, can plants respond to music or people speaking to them and stuff like that. Some aspects of phototropism, how is it that growing towards and understanding plant movement. I also have things on plant sensing. These are a little bit more technical papers, and I've been debating on where to go from them because I find them really interesting, but I fear sometimes that they get a little too technical. So let me know what you're most interested in. Where are the things where you want me to touch on them in these papers? Are there any papers or any articles that you've seen that you'd like me to go into? Or also, what would you like me to touch on for our plant-inspired masterclasses? Remember, they happened the second Tuesday of every single month inside of Blooming Sprouts. And I would love to hear, what are the main topics that you want me to touch on there? Because that's where we can go in deeper. That's where we'll pick one little topic and we'll like deep dive into it. So, but this is it. This has been our Foundations of Plant Intelligence by Anthony Trewavas in 2017. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And I hope that you are enjoying our weekly live commentary every single Friday. I'm trying to publish it in other channels, but I have to admit I've been a little bit, it's the holidays, you know how it is. I'll get back into the swing of things. But let me know what your thoughts are. What are the directions you want me to go in? And there are a lot of papers to go through. Like, there are still a lot out there. And in 2022 and 2023, believe it or not, a lot of really good ones were published. So I might just skip to some of those because a lot of those are about communication. And I feel like that might be an area of interest as well. But this is it for today. I hope you have an absolutely stupendous new year. Remember, resist the urge to hold back your evolving green brilliance. And if I can support you in your growth in 2024 in any way, myself, all of my plant partners are all here to support you. And thank you for being a sprout and for being here with us. Bye for now.